Hello, I'm Jamie.
I'm Connor.
And today we're doing 1960s.
Yeah. I'm Alex, I'm going to be covering the 1980s.
Drummond.
I'm Joe.
I'm Macaulay, and we're going to be looking at sports development in the 2000s.
Kicking off with 60s. Today is, in 60s is facilities, funding and participation. One of the main focuses on the funding was the need to raise participation levels and reduce numbers of young people who drop out of sport from after schooling, which has also got something to do with the Wolfenden report.
Right, in the 1980s, the key milestones or events were looking at the amount of sports facilities that are being improved, what the government had done to help the country in terms of sport participation again, and also what the action sport did to help improve the participation levels. So examples would be looking at ethnic minorities and the youth.
We covered, like, in the 2000s we covered plans such as like the school games and sporting future for all. There were also a game plan as well. There were others.
We'll also look at like facilities and funding into like different schemes in the 2000s to keep like participation levels high.
Firstly, Jamie, do you know like actually what the welfare state actually did in the 60s?
Yeah, it was the most comprehensive policy of like a document that was basically concerned about sport and that something needed to be done about it with participants. Like I said before, its main focus was to raise the participation levels and increase the numbers of young people who take part.
Do you have a say, Connor, on it, or shall I pass it
Going
on?
back to Wolfenden report that I forgot to mention earlier on each show, it were just get this up here. It were the Central Council for Physical Recreation that appointed a small independent committee to examine the general position of sport in this country and to recommend what action should be taken by statutory and voluntary bodies if games, sports and outdoor activities were to play their full point in promoting the general welfare of the community. And reason why it were called the Wolfenden report was because the CCPR, which was the Central Council for Physical Recreation, appointed Sir John Wolfenden the chairman of the committee. And as Jamie said, main thing about that was just to stop children leaving school and not participating in sport afterwards, which is going to increase amount in facilities and funding, because a lot of children will have been leaving school and then thinking, right, where am I going to go play football now? Because they're going to go play it on the street with their mates, but there's no facilities, there's no clubs, that's because they've got no funding, so clubs can't be.
So there's no progression.
There's no progression whatsoever. So that's why a lot of children were leaving school and not participating in sport, not going further in it, and just go off and work at mines or something like that, you know, as you do in the 60s.
Also, it was there was a report of it being highly praised of contribution to sport and lessening the number of social problems such as crime to do with youth. So it was keeping children
Off street.
Out off the streets, giving them something to do and keeping them away from crime.
Do you think it's changed at all throughout the 2 decades between, Alex?
It has, but following on from what they've said, in the 70s it improved again, but once it got to the 80s, when Margaret Thatcher was in power, the government took a massive step back. They weren't too interested in improving sport. Obviously the population was going to carry on increasing, but they weren't very interested in keeping the improvements of facilities and participation levels rising. The only reason they did look into sport a little was to do with hooliganism and the riots that started, and that was because of obviously there's unemployment levels starting to rise and things, so there's more free time, and then therefore there was not as much for them to do because of lack of facilities. The government believed individuals should do more for sport. An example is that more volunteers coming forward, basically because they didn't want to spend that much money on sport, so they wanted volunteers, which obviously you do it for free.
Yeah.
Thatcher supported the elite, and then again she only looked back to the working class due to the riots and people that were unemployed.
It's just negative side, isn't it?
Yeah. They also looked at private investment into sport. Obviously, again, that because they were looking to decrease the amount of funding they were putting into the sport. Obviously, private investment would then put that in. So the government, therefore, again, didn't want to spend that much to improve such as your facilities, your opportunities that not just young people, older people have as well.
Was that when the government was just trying to get personal gain out of it? So
Yeah.
they were just putting money in to get money out?
So is it like a conservative approach? They focus for individuals rather than
Yeah.
Well, it's
social
never going to
group.
progress for all like different tiers of classes as it is if, like Thatcher, as you just said, she's just looking at what the working class, what they're doing bad, like riots and hooliganism, stuff like that. They're going to think, right, we're not going to fund these because this is all they're going to do. They're not looking at what it actually does for, like I said, like who said Jamie or you said get kids out of crime.
Yeah.
It's not. They're not looking at any of the positives, so that's why government's not going to think, right, we'll fund this, because more media attention's focusing around hooliganism and all negative things that's happening.
You just said it takes the effect what the actual government are doing away. So everybody's thinking about the riots. They're not actually looking at the reason why they're rioting, because of their unemployment, because of the lack of funding in sport, the free time, they've nothing to do. It goes back to like they were in the 60s. They're going kicking a ball on the street again. They're not actually able to go to a sports facility or a sports field, play the football or any other sports, tennis, things like that. They're basically on the streets just knocking a ball about or whatever.
So like considering that, like Margaret Thatcher, like you said, she was more bothered about elite performance to like gain a profit.
Yeah.
What sort of like effect would you think that had? Because like you said, there ain't enough opportunities for kids and people that like, you know.
If you think about it, like if they're just bothered about elite performers,
There's going to be
there's
no
going to
one
be
to fill the boots out there.
because there's going to be these poor kids who, with rate coaching, rate facilities, rate funding, these kids would be the elite performers. Don't matter what background you come from, what class you are, you can't help how you're brought up, really, can you? It's like, say, give an example. I watched a documentary on Zidane. He were poor, couldn't even afford to play in trainers, and look where he was. What did he win? Ballon d'Or. Won Ballon d'Or. It doesn't matter what class or background you come from. It's just you need that coaching and that funding, and then they're going to be elite performers, and they're not going to be working class no more, are they? Because you think about football, go on and how much money they're on, then they're elite performers, they're top end of what people are earning. So
That's going back to, from Alex's point, going back to the 1960s, how they set up a sports council, and its main responsibilities was distributing the government grants for supporting organisations and promotion of general sports. But they were to remain independent from the government to preserve non-political nature of the sport. You know what I mean?
So how do you think 2000s did with the welfare state? Personally, we've managed to go. They didn't have much more of an effect as the other previous years because it were more dominant for benefits and unemployment in sport. That's where agencies such as the Sport England and UK Sport were actually introduced properly, and that's what their role was, to improve and better not only grassroots but individual sports. Anything else?
Well, bringing it back on to like the point we made earlier, to do with like not enough opportunities for the kids. In the 2000s, they've started to bring in like a lot more opportunities. Like school games in 2006, the aim was to compete, like make schools competing into school competitions for kids to get them interested into sport and into like the more competitive side. it was also
they managed to like do a lot. They've worked with other agencies. School games, it was Sainsbury's set
So
up.
they've managed to create basically a network.
Yeah, they did a thing that was produced in the game plan in 2002 called Joined Up Thinking, where they actually got a bunch of agencies, like Youth Sport Trust, Sport England, national governing bodies, Department for Education, Department of Health, all that. They all grouped up to try and increase participation for all kids, young ages and disabled.
Well, they're going to have to, because like you've got your after school clubs and stuff like that. Like you mentioned that there's a lot more unemployed, because population's obviously growing and growing and growing. There's going to be more unemployed people, and some parents would rather, I know it sounds a bit nasty, but they'd rather go and spend a £5 on a pack of beer rather than paying a £5 for the kid going to an after school club that's been set up for them to take their participation in sport to other level. That's why like Sport England and stuff and other committees and groups like that have been set up to try and help and make sure kids are being able to participate in sport other than just kicking a ball on the street if they can even afford a ball.
Well, we might come back to funding after anyway.
So do you think with the 2006 game set up, do you think that's had a positive outcome on?
Yeah, because
getting
it's a
people
genuine
introduced
thing
into
that
sport?
happens yearly.
Oh, so they've carried it on.
Yeah, personally, I did a Sheffield Sport Institute officiating in disabled sports. No, but all the AFOP school games, it were only a regional event, that one, but it goes on.
So it's
Got its own process. It has like a structure. Like school competitions, and it progresses.
Yeah.
Next, anyway, let's go on to facilities. We'll just have a quick one on this.
Well, they're talking about 1960s.
Yeah, in the 1960s there weren't
Rubbish.
very many facilities about, and when I mean weren't very many, there were 4 in all of England.
What about in 80s?
In 80s, a lot had been done in the 70s, so time to come to the 80s through the government that had massively put a lot of money and effort in to improve and create more. Start there in 1980, there were over 1,000 sports centres. So obviously you can see
Well, that's a massive difference in,
yeah,
in
massive.
what 20
20 years you've gone from what matters 4 to over 1,000.
I think it's about how much a difference that'll make, how many people can participate then.
So yeah, you've got your rising population, but over 1,000 sports centres, obviously they're straight away what that can offer opportunities wise. What about 2000s?
Well,
has it kept going?
from a survey in 2015, we found that there's 1,373 protected playing fields for schools, generally just for recreational use of sports. So
that's just playing field.
Yeah.
that's just playing fields. So
We couldn't find actual statistics on it because
they'll probably
it's
do that
they're
many.
constantly growing and growing.
yeah,
Initiative that they've brought in over the last 2000 was build and build and build. That's why it's non-stop.
Well, that's what it's like, isn't it?
Well,
There's
they're
more
like-
people coming in. They've got to build.
But they didn't only build, they built
Facilitate
facilities
the
for
population.
multi-use, multi-purpose, like widespread across the country. So
Like your 3Gs that we've
So like,
yeah, but you can even do there's archery places and all that around.
Yeah.
So
in 80s, obviously, the action sport was introduced. So obviously, this is like, as we touched on earlier, 2000s, a little group such as Sport England. So this was funded by the Sports Council, which obviously then progressed into Sport England. They looked at, obviously the government wasn't doing very much. They looked at improving the amount of facilities, or getting more facilities opened, built. So they looked at getting 800 more sports halls, 50 more swimming pools, and then obviously improving the other swimming pools that were already there. 3,000 more pitches. And they were doing that, as we've talked about, the groups now in the 2000s. They were doing that because the lack of things that the government were doing. Because they lost 5,000 fields to put general buildings on, to develop buildings on, not looking at sport, just general buildings. So there you go, 5,000 fields. Could even put 100 recreation fields in. But that shows what the government did in the 80s, really, for participation levels.
we will carry on with participation. What have you got on participation in the 60s?
You can't. People that participated in the 60s, you talk about facilities, there's 4 facilities in all the country. Can't really blame people for participation levels. Like, in our day, if you want to participate in a sport, you've got a local club, haven't you?
Yeah.
Like in Barnsley.
In Barnsley, there's local clubs there's archery, there's rugby, football. You can go
squash.
Join out.
If generally at sixes, it'll kind of
if you
just
want
go down
to
to go down to a field.
Go down to a
Six
field.
is
Put the jumper down.
Doesn't have to be specifically for a game of football or tennis or any other type of sports. Just got to generally, like you said, stick your jumpers down.
Well, but government just didn't really care, did they? That's what sport was.
I think forced facilities were spread widely across the country, and all they weren't aimed
to
for
be a participant in sport, the main option was to take part in school, because that is the only place that you'd be able to have it, and that is why the Wolfenden report was basically created to obviously continue it on through, and this is why we've got more participation in the 80s, which has led to more facilities, more sports.
If you think about
which has led on to 90s to the early 2000s to
just progressed all the way
to where
through,
we are now. So
so they've addressed issue the population compared to facilities.
Yeah.
And they've obviously thought, hey, we need to do something about it. And then obviously they'll have seen statistics of what people are doing, not resulting to crimes and stuff. Because if you're a kid born on the streets, you're brought up in a slightly rough area, there's naught to do. You're going to result to crime, aren't you? I know it sounds like.
Well, yeah, you can imagine with this town. There's all the. I don't know if
you've that much free time. You're not going spending a couple of hours kicking a ball around.
And that's
with this town.
That just wants to egg a window or something, doesn't that? That just wants to put shit through a letterbox or something.
This town would be a good example, because in 1960s, what were there?
I don't think there's anything in Barnsley at all. It's not a major city, is it? I think closest
schools,
Manchester maybe. Manchester probably the closest one that they've had.
Unless that's why I was saying the only way you'd be able to take part in sport is through school, because they would have the basic sports field.
Because obviously they didn't have a lot of money them days to do the travelling.
Basic sports fields, just grass.
Not even cut grass,
just cut grass, long grass, like ever up moors. Stick a couple of jumpers on it. Kids coming back with gashes in the thighs.
What happened to participation levels in the 80s then, Alex?
Nothing much really, through lack of improvement through the government. If you followed on from the 7th, they're more like they've increased. The aim obviously was to get 1.9 million more men and 3.9 million more women. They will have improved gradually, because following on from 70s, there's more facilities, so they will have generally gone up, but they've not risen as much as they could have done if the government carried on putting money in. And
they were only focusing on the elite.
If they looked at the grassroots more, there'd have been a massive rise in participation. So they didn't really achieve what they could have done due to not being too bothered. They've not followed on from starting the 60s, the 70s. They've kind of took a massive step back. And then obviously they've increased participation slightly, but not what they could have achieved.
So Joe, could you tell us about what the participation levels are like in the 2000s?
I'll refer to just one article, an article which were initiation, which were really supported in early 2002.
They're going to reference that in brackets at end.
Yeah. It was a game plan anyway, and that aim was to have a 75% increase of kids to participate in at least 2 hours of PE a week, which isn't a lot. 2 hours. It's nowhere near enough.
They've cut that
I'm
down.
sure they've cut it down, didn't
Like, I was working.
It went up to 4 hours, and then this year they've cut it back down to 2 hours.
Speaking to about it went up and then it came back down, I think.
I'm telling you now, still some schools will not do.
It's not
2
enough,
hours
is
a
it?
week, right?
It's more
You need
up
to do
your school as well.
What did we do? We did about 2.
We did an hour. It was an hour a week.
An hour a week at primary school.
And then if you took it as an option, then you got another hour.
And then but thing is, right? Your government's complaining about
obesity,
and then they're saying you only need to do
an hour
a week.
It's nowhere near enough.
When they're telling you need to do at least an hour a day.
The thing is though as well, you don't exactly get the full hour of actual
You get about
education.
40 minutes if you're lucky.
You get about half an hour, 40 minutes, if you're lucky, because you've got obviously get changed. And then obviously you're getting into groups and then like telling the kids what they're doing. That can sometimes take a long time.
So if you think about even 2 lessons a week, you've only got an hour.
With the decline of PE teachers being available, there's not that many about really.
But that were a thing that they actually tried to introduce. They tried to allow PE teachers to have an extra day off, so then it'd be more specialised and better, practical at least. But like you said in 60s then anyway, you know funding, I said welfare state main area. Were there any other things, or were it just individual based?
It was mainly the the welfare state.
Or about individual families, did they have? They had issues, didn't they?
You only had your selected few.
Yeah.
Basically, that could afford the funding to send the children to
Manchester, London,
facilities. If not, you were a working class kid.
You're talking they're going to be elite, aren't there, as well? There's going to be some special kids.
Kicking football around on the street, playing one touch or something like that, you know.
What funding did you have in the 80s then?
Majority of the funding come through the Sports Council. To improve sport,
I know
as again, obviously, the government showed that little interest. They obviously put bits of money in to keep sport going, things like that. But they tried using sport with the riots.
I know there was I'm not sure what year, but it was the National Lottery that introduced, weren't it?
Like 90s.
They put so much into sport.
Yeah, it were a certain person who aspired.
94, 95.
Something like that, yeah. I think it was 94. Laston then, we'll do funding in 2000s.
For the school games, the funding came from the lottery and the government funding. That were over 128 million in 2006. In 2010-2015, 35.5 million was coming from the lottery funding going to Sport England, and 28.4 million from
the Department of Health
and Sport England from the school games.
So that basically shows
if you do look at it compared to what it was in the 60s compared to 2000s, how much is going into it, even though we probably still think that it's not enough. It's a lot more compared to what it was back in the 60s. You'll think children in the 60s, obviously because we ain't experienced that, you've got to think, well, we're a lot more lucky to be a child in this era than that one, because four facilities in all the countries are absolutely shit.
I think that there's at least 4 in this town.
Yeah. No, there's easily a lot more. Well, a facility could also be a field, couldn't it?
Well, Shore-Lane's what? Archery,
hockey,
cricket,
squash,
not tennis, sorry.
Rugby, football.
Running. They do that running stuff, don't they?
That's got 7 there.
Overall,
7 up at Shore-Lane.
Yeah.
Overall, though, this shows like the progression of sport, say from the 60s, because like you said, there was only 4, and now there's like so many opportunities and so much funding going in.
It's not just elite performers are getting looked at either. Everyone's getting.
It's not just having a good impact on sport either. It's having a good impact on people's lives with job opportunities.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there's a lot more jobs in sports now, isn't there?
There's a lot of jobs from being a caretaker of a facility to a big manager of a facility. And
it's also helping with people's like social qualities and stuff.
Yeah.
So like being a part of a team, obviously teaches you how to like be a part of a team and work together with people. It's also working on like communication and like stuff like that.
I think that sums it all up then.
We're all in agreement, aren't we? Wait up. We're just going to finish it off with a Fire in the Booth by Joe.